morning? Hey, Janina. How are you? Good to see you this morning. This is a, how many of you guys enjoy that saxophone in here today? You like that? It's good to have a little bit of a lead instrument. 19 years ago. Can anybody believe I'm about to give you an exact date? Anybody believe that? Okay. June the 18th of 2004, I was at the Atlanta airport. What's it called? Hartsfield International Airport. I was up there ready to take a flight to Paris, France, to end up in Lyon. And while I was there that day, it was an Olympic year. And the torch, you remember when the Olympics came through and the torch came through? Anybody see it come down 138? The day that I was in Atlanta to take a flight to Paris, France, the torch came through the city. And then the last day that I was in Paris before I came back from this mission trip that I was going to go on, the torch was in Paris. But that trip in my life was a seed that God planted. You know, there are times in your life when God is leading you and calling you, He'll plant a little bit of a seed in your heart, and you won't really understand the fullness of it or what He's really going to ask of you out of it in that moment, in that time. But God, in our lives, He plants seeds at time. And so there was this, as I was on this trip to Lyon, France, where Kevin is a missionary at, God began to whisper in my heart. And I began to sense His call in the ministry of my life. And it was on this trip that God called me and whispered into my ear that I was going to be in ministry one day. And I didn't know what that looked like in the moment. But I was there. I got this feeling that when I got back, I needed to begin Bible college. And then the week I got back, I was walking through the atrium at Community Bible. And Pastor Butch said, "Hey, Chris, we're starting a Bible college. Would you like to attend?" And so the rest is history. Here we are today. But I want you to welcome my good friend, Kevin, from Lyon, France. He's one of the missionaries that we sponsor here at Generations Church.
Good morning, church. I'm so excited to be here with y'all. I mean, it doesn't seem like it could possibly be that long ago that y'all came over to play. It's just amazing to see how God uses stuff, right? Like you never know what He's going to do. Real quick, another story just about that time when they were there. You know, we did a bunch of concerts. They have this thing every year in France called the Festival of Musique, Fête de la Musique. And the group came and played, and we used some of our French singers, and we sang in a public square in France, which is pretty unheard of. We were singing worship songs in French and English both, using French and English musicians together, working with American musicians, and we did this thing. And we found out later, so we had some of the elders from our church there. We're out giving out tracts and talking to people, had Bibles and all that. And there was a fella, true story, there was a fella up on the top of a building, we're right down in the city, that was up there to commit suicide. He'd lost his wife, wife had left him and lost his job, and he just figured he didn't have nothing else left, so he was just going to jump off. And he heard these guys playing, singing about Jesus and about hope and about life. So he came down, went up to the elder that was passing out Bibles and stuff, and said, "Can you tell me about this?" Now, I don't know where the guy is today, but for weeks and weeks afterward, he was meeting with that elder, and then he ended up moving away, and we lost contact with him, as happens lots of times in life. What I do know is that fellow who was not saved did not take his life that day because of that praise and worship music, which is a pretty good segue into who we are, what we do, and then we're going to open up the Bible a little bit and look at what God says to us about why we sing. Now, can I get that up there? Is that possible or not even? Or I'll just look back this way, I reckon. So this is us. My lovely wife Cheryl's in the back. I was a high school band director in Jonesboro. Was there Jonesboro, and then Kendrick Middle School. I opened up that as the band director back a minute or two ago. And schools were getting kind of tough. I was having a harder and harder time teaching. I took up a loaded gun from a little 12-year-old flute player at Kendrick one day, and I started praying, "Lord, maybe there's something else that, I don't feel like I'm making any headway here. I'm not sure that I'm up to this task of teaching these kids." And my band started getting worse and worse because I couldn't out-teach or out-love on those kids to fix all the problems they had going on in their lives. much as I thought I could or wanted to be. And so here's my dilemma. Before, I taught in an easier school to teach in at the time. It had good bands, and we won trophies, and that made me feel like I was a good person and did my job. And then I went to a school that was a lot harder to teach in, and I was teaching harder and working harder, but my bands weren't getting the same good grades we used to get and winning as many trophies and all that. And, I was young, 30, not even. And I was like, I don't know if I could do this. I wasn't mature enough to stay in that place and say, well, it doesn't matter what kind of grades my bands get at festival. I'm just going to love on these kids and serve them as best I can. 57-year-old Kevin might have could have done that, but 30 Kevin wasn't ready to do that, just telling you. And so I put in my resignation at that school, but then again, I didn't feel like I could go back to teaching either, because if I left these kids who were struggling just to go to kids who had easier schools so I could win more trophies, that kind of made me a scumbag. And I was a believer in Jesus Christ, so I couldn't do that either. So, I was like, in the Bible, sometimes it talks about God takes something and makes it bitter in your mouth. He took this thing I loved doing, teaching, and all of a sudden I didn't like doing it anymore at all. And not where I was. If I went somewhere else, well, then I'd have that burden on. I said, Lord, what do you want? So I was praying. And one day I prayed and I said, Lord, I don't know what you want. I was walking around my cul-de-sac in Jonesboro, and I thought, I don't know what you want. But if you'll tell me, in fact, my honest to goodness prayer to God was, I said, if you'll pull a Gideon on me and slap me upside the head with something, then I'll do it, whatever it is. And then, go one more. I'm going to jump these out of, well, you know what, forget that. We'll just wait. It's not what I thought it was. It kind of threw me off that I couldn't see the thing back there, so I was having to turn around. I was planning on looking at that. This fella, who you'll see in a minute, in a couple slides, I prayed and I said, Lord, I'll do whatever you want. The next day, because God's awesome, the next day, this guy calls me up and says, hey, Kev, you hadn't met me yet. We don't know each other, but somebody gave me your name, and I'm looking for someone to come lead worship at my church in Lyon, France. Now, you pray that prayer one day, and the next day you get that phone call. You're kind of scared not to go, right? I mean, I was going to be like Jonah in the whale otherwise. I mean, it would have been a whole lot better if he just went to Nineveh in the boat, right? So I decided I didn't want to go by fish. I'd rather go by boat. So I said, okay, I guess we're going to France. And that's how this whole thing started. God called. You talk about being called into the ministry. I was called. I went and told everybody, well, we're going to France to be missionaries. Do you speak French? No, not a word of French. No. Do you have any idea? No. Ever been to France? No. I'll go, I guess, I reckon. So, why France? Hey, praise God. Thank you so much, whoever fixed that. I'm so grateful. So, why France? Because it's a reasonable question, right? Like missionaries are supposed to be for Africa and stuff, right? But why they need a missionary in France? So, France needs Jesus real bad. So let's look at a couple things about France. Here's how I see this. Y'all are partners with me in ministry. Now, if you ever look at the book of Philippians, I can make a strong biblical case that Philippians can be read as a support letter, a prayer letter from Paul the missionary back to his supporting church in Philippi. You read it, like when I read it as a missionary, that's how what it looks like to me. And he talks a lot about their partnership, and you see how much he loves them and how much they love up on him. And so y'all are my partners. We're able to do this stuff we do in France because churches like y'all and people like y'all make sacrifices so that we can be over there doing that. So I'm going to try to tell y'all why we do what we do, what exactly it is we're doing, what you're investing in as investors. Does that make sense? So France. Why France? So that guy up on the left there, on my left, on your left too, that's good. Louis XIV. He's the king, their most famous, biggest king, the guy who built Versailles, one of his summer houses. Got a pretty big ego. So when this whole thing called the Reformation came about, he said, no, we're not going to have any of these Protestants in my country because I'm Catholic, said the king. And since I am France, everybody in my country is going to be Catholic. So here's how far it went. It was against the law to be Protestant. He created a whole nother division of the police army called the Dragoons. That's the fellow on the horse on the other side with that fancy gun. special gun they gave him called Dragoon was the name of the gun they used. That's why they called him that. Their whole reason for existence. He created a whole new branch of the police just to harass the Protestants. And they would torture the Protestant pastors. They put the women in prison. We can get the next. So that is a prison tower in the town of Cray. I know it looks like Crest toothpaste, but you pronounce it Cray. We've been there. They put Protestant, especially women, mostly because they torture and kill the men more, but Protestants would be put in there with other criminals. And here's the crazy thing. Like a lot of pastors' wives were put in there. They could leave the prison anytime they wanted to. All they had to do was renounce their faith. And you can go in there and look on the walls. They're sketched in about never giving up, never surrendered. Women stayed there their whole lives after. I'm going to stay here. They could walk out any day they want to. They said, no, forget this being saved by grace stuff. Whatever you say, they held on to their faith and stayed in prison. Very inspiring to me. So France has never had a Protestant evangelical, what we consider church. You might have heard of the Huguenots. So they did have them. They just ran them out. So Huguenots were French Protestant evangelical Christians that got run. They're all in other countries. Came to the United States, went to Germany, went to South America. But they couldn't be in France because it's illegal. They get tortured, killed, put up. So we're going to try to run through this pretty fast because I've got a lot of stuff and I don't want to keep y'all here till 1 o'clock. There we go. So here's some statistics that y'all probably don't know about France. You can read as well as me. I'm not going to read all that to you, but 58%, well, I guess I will read all that to you. 58% of the country is atheist, and 20 of them are like hardcore. 20% are hardcore, and that's what we run into. So that means statistically, when my wife and I are walking down downtown Lyon, which is a big city, a little under 2 million, he's been, the odds of me bumping into another Christian is small. I'm not going to go to the Kroger or the Walmart and run into another Christian. They're just not there. 32% of French people say that they're Catholic because it's a Catholic culture. Like even their school calendar runs by the Catholic calendar. They have a Pentecost vacation. They don't know what that means. They have an All Saints Day vacation for school, but I have no idea what that means. But so there's a cultural thing. They say they're Catholic, but they're not practicing Catholic, so not even that. Most homes don't have a Bible. There's more Muslims, significantly more Muslims than there are. You can see that than there are Christians, and that's because France has got a lot of the North African countries that used to be French. So they've immigrated in, and those people tend to have much bigger families than do the French atheists. So the families get bigger. So there's more Muslims. So we're dealing with that. The one that kills me the most is that there's 100,000 around spiritualists, mediums, crystals, soothsayers, all of that, and about 2,500 pastors. 40 spiritualists for every pastor. Wrap your head around that. 40 people doing voodoo, let me do tarot cards, let me read your palm, for every pastor in the country. And the French spend, it's a huge industry, the French spend 4 billion euros every year on that. Okay, let's go. So here's the good news. Here's what's happening now. Especially in the last 10 years, we've seen a lot of things change. There's a church planted almost every week in France. In 1950, there's about 50,000 evangelical Christians, over 500,000 today, 650,000 today. And the idea is we're doing a lot of church plants. We're planning, that is it, planting churches. So y'all are my heart right here. I mean, planning, going somewhere else and planning a church that's going to speak to the people in the place, that's what we do, all right? And when I got there, the French Protestants were about 1.5% of the population 20 years ago. Now we're up to about 3%, according to a Harvard study. 3 is still small, but it's also double what it was. So we're outdistancing the increase in population, and people are getting saved, y'all. And the goal across France by the churches there is we want to have one church for every 10,000 people. We're way away from that, but that's our goal. So what do we do to do that? So there's a little collage that shows a bunch of stuff. I have a hard time, y'all, telling folks what I do because I do a lot of different stuff. And it's hard to say, oh, just do this thing. Well, I do this thing and this thing, and Cheryl helps me with most of it. So let's talk about a few of them. So again, y'all are my investors, right? Y'all are my partners in this. Everything we're doing, y'all are doing. That's the Bible. That's not me. That's Bible. So y'all helping us to do this is y'all doing this, if that makes sense. So that's the couple. That's the fellow on the right, the goofy guy, not me, the other goofy guy, is the one who called me and said, hey, you want to come pastor? You want to come help me in my church? I need a worship leader, and I think you might be it. And never met me. Somebody just gave me the name. And he called in 2001. It was a fateful day for sure. And that's how Chris got over there. And that's how God planted this church. Isn't it just amazing what God does? So let's talk about some of the stuff we do. There's just some pictures of different things. You see, this is the church where we are now in Trévoux. So the main church where I went to work with that guy in Florent, that church was about 100, 150 people when we got there, which is a pretty big church in France. Average church size in France is about 60. Okay, so a pretty big church. It grew to about 300. Then about 10 years ago, we started planting churches. And we started planting churches. And we'll talk about how to do that in a second. But so there you go. So those are, the one there in the middle is in Villeurbanne where the first church is. That little town is the very last one in Mions. That church where I was grew to 300, and we planted a church. And about 2 years later, we planted a church, and we planted a church, and we planted a church. And my job was to make sure that all of this stuff was well and in place with each new church plant, so they weren't shuffling around. So like the first church plant, me and Cheryl, a bunch of people, we'd go out, and once a month, even we set up a team. We trained the team of people that used to be on the worship team of the big church that come over to the little church. But we'd still come over, and I'd do worship for them like once or twice a month sometimes to take that off their shoulders at first, because starting a church is hard if y'all hadn't heard, you know. And so, but to work, and then those two churches, so us and that church, worked together to plant the third church. And then the three churches worked together to plant the fourth church. And then worked together to plant the, see what I'm saying? So it wasn't a church, it was a bunch of folks who cared about the gospel being spread around Lyon, working and sending resources and sending folks and sending whatever you needed. How can we help? And that's how we've been able to plant. So in the last 10 years now, that church that we started at, we planted the first one, it just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. That church now is a group of 5 churches in Lyon. Is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 churches in Lyon? Sorry, because I can't do math. Going on. Okay, another thing I do, so I got there. We didn't have a lot of these great songs. We're going to talk in a minute about songs we sing. There weren't a lot of songs. Most of what we do are translations, and there weren't any resources for worship leaders. Most of the time, worship leaders in a little bitty old church was somebody, wasn't nearly what y'all got going on here. It was, I play a little guitar. I took piano in high school. Great, you're the worship leader. And so my heart as a teacher is not, like a great big old church doesn't really need me. But I go in there and some gal's like, I'm trying to do the best I can. I don't know can you help? And to give them resources to help these people that are trying to serve God by serving their church in worship and to help them do their job better. We wrote a book, which I'll talk about in a second, which, by the way, Mara, you'd asked me about this. It's being translated this year into English because you had asked me. So I'm excited about that. It's in French because, yeah. Okay, so another thing I do is a podcast where I just, because I've been doing this ministry for a long time in France, which is a really little fish bowl to be a fish, right? So I know most of the people that are worship leaders or pastors. Anybody's doing much, if you're an artist, if you're putting out worship music, I'm probably on your cell phone and you're definitely on mine because I reach out to them. I mean, we need to help each other. So I'll have them on and we'll just talk shop for an hour, and I'll record that and put it out there, and people go, oh, that's really good. So you have the guy who wrote this song or this artist or this pastor, and we'll just discuss stuff so that worship leaders can listen to it and say, oh, that might be helpful. Next. So also wrote, that's the famous book I was talking about. And it's just the title there, which I hate, by the way. Turns out when you write a book, you don't get to pick the title. The publishing company picks the title. That kind of stinks, but it is. I wanted to call it Intentional Worship, which I thought was cool, like a no. So this is actually what that says: a manual for directing a church service. Which I was like, ah. But I didn't get to pick it. And in French, it didn't quite sound as bad. But yeah. But anyway, so it's a book, and it does a big biblical survey of why we sing and how church, why we do the stuff we do in church, and then how to do it. Going on? Because I speak French, and there's a lot of French-speaking countries in Africa, that's opened up a little doorways for me to go do the same stuff, working with worship leaders and pastors in Africa, teaching this stuff. So I've been now 4 times to Africa. I have no idea how many. Last time, that was when I was in Cameroon last time. We did 16 days in 3 different cities, 3 different seminars. About 450 pastors came, just teaching about worship. You know, because they're doing some crazy practices. It's like, it's not in the Bible, guys. There's reasons we do what we do. Let's look at the Bible. So finish up this part. I told you I teach at a Bible school that helps train pastors, so I teach a class on worship, and I direct a choir that goes around and does a bunch of concerts, evangelism concerts, where we try to use music to tell people about Jesus. Going on? So now let's get into the Bible part. We're gonna talk pretty much just about one verse, Colossians 3:16. It's easy to remember because it's like John 3:16, except for it's in Colossians. Why do we sing? Have y'all ever thought about that? It's a real question. Y'all can answer. Like, why? Churches always sung. Even in the Old Testament, they always sang. How come? Have you thought about it? Yeah, to worship God. But there's lots of ways to worship God. There's something about singing that's special. And that's biblical, by the way. We'll talk about it. But there's something like you can worship God, I praise you. That's worshiping. That's praising him for sure. Prayer, I think worship is even, when you're serving at the welcoming people and loving on people as they come walking in, that's a form of worship. I can make a great case for that biblically. But singing is like its own thing. Like the church always sings. Why do we sing? What's such the big deal about singing? I mean, it's because here's what happened to me. You may or may not relate to this, probably not because you're a lot sharper than me. When I first started, Florent, the pastor, the guy that called me over, pulled me over. I've been in the country about 3 months, didn't speak a lick of French hardly, could say a few sentences, croissant and stuff. He pulled me over, and it was September, everybody's coming back, school's starting, vacation's over. And he's introducing me to the church in French, except he didn't tell me what he's going to do. And I was like, what are you doing? He spoke great English, Florent. He said, it's okay, just smile. No, like for real, man, what are you doing? Like I don't like not knowing what it's okay, just smile. And in between that, he's going, this is Kevin, and he's a missionary, and he's going to be doing church praise and worship at the church, and da-da-da-da-da. And I finally figured out what he's doing, and I got hit in the face with a brick because I realized that I was in charge of something in a language I did not speak, and the thing I was in charge of, I could not give you a definition of. Give me a good biblical definition of worship. Now, y'all could. At that moment in my life, I could not. I'd been on worship teams. I'd done it. I kind of thought I know what it looked like, maybe. I know when I enjoyed it. But like, what does the Bible actually say about it? I don't know. So I started reading, and I started looking, and I started praying, and I started hunting everything I could. So here's some of the stuff I found. First reason we sing is because it's biblical, okay? The Bible, the biggest book in the Bible is really a hymn book. If y'all didn't know, Psalms is a collection that's put together by priests of 150 songs. Every psalm is a song. And if you want good models of what we should be singing in church, Psalms is a pretty good place to start. There's more than 400 references to singing in the Bible, but here's one that really got me. In the Bible, we are commanded more than 50 times to sing I'm putting my teacher hat, in the imperative form of the verb. Like, sing. Kind of like when your kid's fixing to run out in the road and you go, stop. Not stop if you feel like it, not stop if you please, not please, sing. I tell people, God didn't ask your opinion about whether or not we're supposed to sing in church. He didn't ask mine either. Another thing I like to say as a joke, I said, if you don't like to sing, don't go to heaven. Because we're going to say, Psalm 47 is a great example. Look how many times sing. So this is the imperative form of the verb. Do this thing. Not, you should probably think about doing this thing. Do this thing. Sing praises to God. Sing praises. Sing praises to our King. Sing praises. For God is the King of all the earth. Sing praises with a psalm. One of the reasons we sing is because we're commanded to. This is a great little book. It's about that thick. It's easy to read, by Keith and Christian Getty. If you don't know who that is, you probably know at least one of the songs they wrote. They wrote In Christ Alone, My Hope Is Found. Y'all sung that, I'm sure. They wrote that and a whole bunch of other songs. They're really, their songs sort of sound like old hymns. And there's a lot of content, a lot of good depth, a lot of good Bible in their songs. So this is something he said in his book about congregational singing. We're commanded by God to sing. So we must do it. Not to sing is to disobey. Okay? God's commands are not arbitrary. They're always for his people's good, just as we were told to study scriptures, pray, to give, to take communion. We're commanded to sing with the saints, with each other, not just in the shower, because y'all need to, because our spiritual health depends on it. Singing was given to us by God, and we're commanded to do it. Okay, so what makes a good congregational song? That's Katie. When she was 4, she was directing however many other people on the bus and around. Come on, I'm going to take y'all where we're going. in French. It was pretty funny. Going on. So this is the key verse. If y'all remember nothing, this is Colossians 3:16, first verse I ever learned in French by heart. In fact, I know it better in French than I do in English, to be honest. But let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, teaching and admonishing one another in all wisdom, singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Y'all all heard that verse before. There's not a better verse in the New Testament that talks succinctly about how we sing and why we sing when we gather. And I could talk a whole lot about that, but like I said, we're going to try to get out of here at least before 1. So let the word of Christ, we're going to do a little exposition of that verse real quick together, okay? Let the word of Christ. Word of Christ, if you wanted to just be real rough about it, let the stuff that Jesus said, basically the gospel, everything he said about himself, everything he said, the word in general, let the word dwell in you richly. I love that word dwell. In French, it's demeure. It's got a little bit more oomph to it, the French word. It means live there. It means buy a house in the zip code. It does not mean visit. It does not mean frequent from time to time. So here's really what that verse is. So if you understand, I am going to talk more about this. Colossians, in the first 2 chapters of Colossians, Paul is writing back because the guy Epaphras, I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, started this church after hearing Paul preach, got saved, went back to Colossians, starts this church. We were actually just there not too long ago, my wife and I, we had to go visit that. And all this heresy, these people were teaching they have to do all these old Jewish traditions, they have to do all this stuff, grace, but other stuff too. And Paul's like, no, just Jesus. Jesus is all it is. It's just Jesus. And he spends 2 chapters talking about that pretty hard. And then it's like he draws a line. It's like he finishes. He turns to chapter 3. He goes, okay, now, guys, that we've established that you're saved by Jesus alone, let's talk about how to live together as a church. And that's really what chapter 3 is. If you look through it, it's a whole bunch of, this is how y'all going to live together as a church. He talked about a lot of stuff. So it's like I'm having this conversation with Paul. So Mario, you're a worship leader guy, so I'm going to play the role of Paul, and you're going to play the role of the worship leader guy. So Mario says, so what are we supposed to do? Well, Mario, you need to have the word of Christ dwell richly in all the people in your church. Okay, well, that's good, Paul. That makes sense to me. How am I going to do that? Well, you're going to need to admonish one another. Admonish means like to teach, to encourage, to hold each other accountable, to check each other, You're going to do that mutually. That doesn't mean just the guy up here preaching. I mean, that means all y'all in community, you're supposed to be keeping each other. You're supposed to be encouraging one another. Oh, that's really good, Paul. How do I do that? Mario, I'm really glad you asked. You're going to do that by singing different kinds of music that are filled with the word, so that when we sing, that gets down in there, and when you need it, it's there. This is equipping you. We sing not just to praise. We sing to praise, but the Bible is really clear. We also sing to edify and learn. We sing to testify. So real quick, I'm going to try to burn through this in about 5 minutes. Here we go. Useful for teaching Scripture. I love this picture. That little gal. So what do we sing in church? What are we supposed to sing in church? Because sometimes, you ever sung a song in church and you go, I don't know about that one. I mean, raise your hand if you had that happen to me. I've had it happen to me. So what are we supposed to sing in church? That little gal, you can't tell in the picture, I don't think. She's smiling, big old thumbs up. Why is she excited? Because she's tall enough to ride the ride. She's fired up because she's going to get to ride on that roller coaster. This is the roller coaster. Colossians 3:16 is that sign. And as a worship leader, which is what my main day job is, among other things, I can't pick a song, y'all, that's not big enough to ride the ride. Because if not, I'm not being, Paul said why we sing. He said, no, Kev, this is what you sing to admonish each other with the word of God. So if the song doesn't have the word, now see, we sang some words today that I like to keep in my heart. That makes sense. I've seen his, this sounded like, I was thinking about Psalm 46 when we were singing that one. I've seen what he does. And he'll do it again. And he gets all my praise. That'll preach, right? That song's big enough to ride the ride. So the first thing we want to make sure is everything we're singing in church is big enough that's taller than than Colossians 3:16. That tells us what we're supposed to sing. All right, let's go on. Here's another one. I'm going to do this real quick. Go read Deuteronomy 31, 32 if you want to be blown away about how powerful music is. So God, something about the way God made us. We are hard formatted for music. We remember what we sing. Watch this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Like you just can't even help it. Right? I mean, like if I were to make you sit silent, because you're formatted that way. Because that song's been in. The word of Christ is dwelling richly in you in that song. That's what I'm talking about, dwelling richly. Okay? So here's what, true story, because in the Bible, God, right before they went over in the promised land, God sits Moses down. He already told him, you've done messed up, you can't go over with them. But before they go, sit down, get Joshua, come in here. We're going, these people, when I put them in the promised land, they're going to screw up again. That's what he tells Moses. This is the International Kevin version of the Bible. They're going to screw up again. And I'm going to be so angry at them because of their sin against me that there's curses are going to come down on them. This is not a new story. And they're going to rail against me, and they're going to start questioning my integrity, and they're going to say things like, God only brought us here so he could kill us, and what? And God's like, I'm not going to have that. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to save these people from themselves. Moses is like, good. How are we going to do that? Moses, sit down. I'm going to teach you a song. Now, when I read that, it blew me away because I was not surprised that the Israelite people, once again, they're just as sinful as I am, that they would rebel against God again, because I've been saved a long time, and I rebel against God all the time because I'm a sinner and I'm stupid sometimes. And I know God's awesome, and I still doubt him and go on and do idiotic things. It didn't surprise me the Israelites going to do that because they've been doing it all through the Bible. God can fix this problem any way he wants to fix it. He chose to fix it. Sit down, Moses. I'm going to teach you a song. And he says in 31, and it goes on into 32, in generations to come, you're going to teach this song to the elders. The elders are going to teach it to the people. And in generations to come that are not born yet, when these people have rebelled against me, some of them are going to remember this song that you're going to teach them today, and they're going to repent because of the words of this song and come back to me, and then I will heal my relationship with them. From a song. Moses, sit down, I'm going to teach you a song. That gave me chills first time I read that. Okay. So, when we sing, a couple things happen. We sing, as we did this morning, towards God, and we also sing towards others, right? It's vertical, horizontal. So I don't have time to go through all this. We can go through it real fast, like super fast. So there's four things that are there. We sing to God. I don't really have to explain that. We know we're worshiping God. We're praising him and giving back the glory he is due. But, you know what? I'm not going to use that anymore. I'm just going to cut through. So you can turn that off or whatever. I'm just going to finish up because I got about just a few minutes and I know what I want to say, and I'm not going to just keep doing that. There's four people that are there, four audiences, four groups that are there every time we sing. There's God. We already talked about that. We know that. There's also very clear, the Bible talks about, there's the community of believers. When you sing, you encourage each other. When I sing, like we sang today, I was encouraged. But I wasn't encouraged because I was singing. I was encouraged because I was singing with y'all. And y'all sing and encourage me. And y'all sing and encourage each other. And you walk out of here more built up. And the word's in you because you're singing together. So there's this horizontal, vertical. I always get mixed up. Vertical, horizontal. There's a horizontal edification going on. Okay? So then there's other believers. If you read Psalm 96, other people that aren't believers. If you read Psalm 96, among other places in the Bible, it talks about singing his praises to the nations. Every Sunday, we ought to act like there's going to be somebody that doesn't know Jesus yet that's in here. And they're going to see, I'm convinced, I've seen it so long, I'm convinced there's not a better testimony for Jesus than believers that are active in worship. Because they walk in and they go, man, y'all are singing that like you believe it. Like y'all got something, I don't know, but there's something happening. I want to know what that is. And they don't understand. You try to keep it, since just as a quick aside, since we know, or we're thinking non-believers are going to be around when we sing, I'm a big fan of keeping words that are understandable around. Like one time we had a Christmas thing, had a bunch of non-believers there, and we were singing we sing a lot of older songs in France. But Emmanuel, Emmanuel, he is called Emmanuel. And this old fellow had been coming to church for a while, taps the pastor on the shoulder, goes, "Who's Emmanuel?" And I didn't think we got to explain who that is, because they don't know. You know, in France, when you got to explain, but we're going to sing about the lamb that was slain, that doesn't mean there's a barbecue out back after church. It's not that, you know. They don't know, so you got to be aware. Non-believers are going to be there. Let's sing stuff they can wrap their heads around, right? So that's the third audience. The fourth one is you. Psalms is full of that. We sang it today. Come on, my soul. Don't you get shy on me. Lift up your voice. You've got a lot. You're singing to you. You're preaching to you because you need it and because I need it. All those things are all happening all at the same time when we meet together to sing. Now, to finish this up, my God, why have you forsaken me? Who can tell me where that comes from? Y'all have heard that before. Where's that come from? Where you see that in the Bible? Psalms. It's most famous because Jesus set it up on the cross, right? My God, why have you forsaken me? But if you look at, so that's the first line of a song that happens to be a psalm. And just like when I made y'all go, when I said, "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," the whole rest of the song is in your mind because you know the song. You're not going to convince me that Jesus only knew the first line of that song. And in fact, that was a common practice among the Jews at the time, where they would say the first line of a song as a way to represent the song. That psalm goes on to be a messianic psalm that says, my hands and feet are pierced. People are mocking me. They're casting lots for my clothes. Y'all, that's the stuff that just literally happened to Jesus that day when he said that. That's in that song that he quotes. And then it ends up with, "You've heard me, you listen to the people who come, you come and save us." And it ends up being, "I will sing praises with my brothers in the assembly, and all nations will bow down to the God of Jacob." That's how that song ends that Jesus said the first line of on the. If you don't know that, you could, what's he talking? Y'all, what you sing in church builds you up for when you're on your cross. You need some words to sing. It gives you words. What we sing gives us words if you're singing the right stuff, if it's tall enough to ride the ride. What you sing builds you up so that when you're in trouble, you're armored up. So it's a little pressure. Just saying. When we sing, we praise God. When we sing, we edify the body. When we sing, we testify about his greatness to non-believers. And when we sing, we build up ourselves so that in days of time and trouble and trial and difficulty, we're ready because he's given us his word that we've learned in here by what we sing. That's why we sing in church, y'all. I just want to finish by saying thank you for partnering with us so that we can go into France and Switzerland and Africa and teach churches that, so that they're better equipped to minister, they're better equipped to make disciples, they're better equipped to plant more churches. That's y'all doing that. We're here. We've got to raise one. In fact, I mean, y'all have helped out. Y'all are helping. We can't go back to France until we get the money raised. We have to get to no, that's serious. The mission said, COVID hit us hard, and you got to be here. You can't go back and do that until. And I called Chris, and y'all stepped up, and y'all have helped us, and we're closer to where we need to be because this church said, yeah, we want to partner with that. I cannot tell you how grateful I am. And in the same way Paul talked about the Philippian church, how much he loves them and appreciates them, and how kind they are to him. That's how I feel about y'all. Y'all are our partners in doing all of this. So the next time I go to a church somewhere in France and teach the same stuff to their worship team, that's y'all doing that. See how that works? Praise God for y'all. I want to pray. Lord, your kingdom is amazing and wonderful. The way you work is amazing and wonderful. You bring people. You sent us over to France. You brought Chris over there to be part of a group, and through that, you grew this church. And then later when we were in need, this church was coming along and helping us and being part of that ministry. I mean, like, you couldn't make this stuff up. You're just amazing in what you do. Help us to remember when we sing these songs, we're not just singing songs, but we're ministering, that we're praising, we're worshiping you, that we're building up our spiritual strength, our spiritual muscles. We're learning these truths and hiding them in our hearts so that they're there when we need them. And God, thank you for your word that we get to sing and get to learn. Because when the enemy comes and tells us stuff like, you're not a good mother, or you're not a good missionary, or you're not a good whatever, or that I'm bigger than God, or that you're going to lose, we go, nope, I know better. And you bring those words back to us when we need them because we've sang them. You're just amazing, God, just like you did with the Israelites with Moses. You just give us those words so that they're there when we need them. We praise you for that gift. We praise you for your love for us. And we just thank you. In Christ's name.